Good afternoon and welcome to the Sustainable Materials Management Webinar Series, a joint effort between the National Recycling Coalition and the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center. My name is Wayne Bowen. I'm the Program Manager for the Recycling Market Center and will serve as your moderator today. We would like to extend a special thanks to Bob Hollis of the Mobius Network for providing the webinar management software for this series, and Lisa Ruggiero and Savannah Patowski of the National Recycling Coalition for assisting the RMC with webinar promotion and technical support. Today's webinar will discuss the impact of glass recycling in the glass container industry. Our presenter today is Pam Baylor, who I will introduce in a moment. Following her presentation, we will conduct a question and answer session. If you have a question or comment, please use the GoToWebinar dialog box located in the control panel on your screen. You may also use the dialog box to request assistance if you're experiencing technical difficulties during the webinar. Please note that an edited version of this webinar will be made available for viewing via YouTube links on both the National Recycling Coalition and Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center websites. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter. Since October of 2014, Pam Baylor has been the Director of Procurement and Customer Service for Anchor Glass, which is headquartered in Tampa, Florida. She has 19 years of work experience in the mining and manufacturing business sector, directing various areas of their supply chain portfolio, including procurement, warehouse ownership, contracted and terminal operations, inventory and replenishment management, logistics management, overall integrated business planning, and customer service. Pam has a BS degree from University of Minnesota. And so now I'm going to turn the program over to Pam.
Thanks, Wayne. Welcome, everybody, to this webinar. I appreciate your attendance and interest in getting a perspective from a manufacturer of glass on the recycling effects and kind of what we see from our perspective. I've presented to a couple different seminars previously in the Northeast Recycling Seminar, as well as in New York earlier this year in May. So I come with a little bit of a different background. I haven't been in glass my entire career. I've been in mining manufacturing, and I've only recently come into the glass market in the past 2 years. So I come with a little bit of a fresh perspective on kind of our view and how we look at it, and potential opportunities where we can go or grow in what we call cullet. And so cullet is one of our largest raw materials that we use in our batch for production processes, and there are several different positives in our production process that I'll go through in the presentation. But just to give you a little bit of a background, cullet is recycled glass. It has life into perpetuity, and we just want to see how we can get a better quality, a better use, and then overall make it a better business stream for everybody that's involved with it. So with that, if you have any questions or anything, please make sure that you raise those, and Wayne will send me any notes midstream. Otherwise, we can wait till the end and we can follow up with those questions at that time. Hold on one second. So if you look at here, you can see where our locations are. We have production locations. Hold on one second. All right, I think I got it fixed. For some reason, it went into webcam. I apologize. So let's start back. So if you look at where we actually manufacture glass, we manufacture in 6 different locations. We have a facility in Shakopee, Minnesota, one in Henrietta, Oklahoma, down in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, in Elmira, New York, in Warner Robins, Georgia, and in Jacksonville, Florida. We have 2 additional support facilities that are in Zanesville, Ohio, and Streator, Illinois, and then our corporate headquarters are located down in the south in Tampa, Florida. When you look at that, it's a pretty diverse. We're really not centered on the West Coast at all. We really are Midwest over to the East Coast and then into that South range. I want to go through and kind of give you just a brief snapshot of what we do in our current facilities. We currently operate various furnaces throughout those facilities, and we use about 10 to 45% in each of those furnaces. 45 is our highest percentage that we use in one of our furnaces, and that's actually in one of our furnaces in Jacksonville, Florida, and the smallest amount is in one of our furnaces in Elmira, New York, and it's similar in Shakopee, Minnesota. So just to go through some of the variances that we get in our cullet to explain why we are not at a higher percentage, some of that goes to the quality and the consistency of the supply that exists today. When you look at Elmira, New York, we have a bottle bill cullet that presents in that marketplace to us. It's excellent quality, and there are excess suppliers inside of that region today. So we have very good percentage usage. The only reason why we have one of our furnaces is that is down in Elmira, New York, is because flint cullet, typically there are 3 colors of cullet. There's an amber, which is your brown bottle. You have a flint, which is your clear bottles, and then you have green, which would be your Heineken and those type of bottles. We don't use green cullet at all. There is a small amount of it that can be mixed inside of the amber cullet, but we prefer that is not in the flint cullet at all. So flint is not as readily available inside of the markets, and it's a little bit harder to get out because it does require the optical sortation process. So we do see that there's a higher percentage of amber or gramber type of mix available inside of the marketplaces. So in New York, we have ample supply for the most part. We have an excess supply of amber glass, and we're still working on several things to try to improve our flint glass supply. In Shakopee, Minnesota, we have some bottle returns that we process ourselves. So we have some local collection organizations that will go through and collect it from hospitality or different collection sites, and they'll actually bring it to our facility, sort it by color, and then we actually have a crusher on site that would process that for us locally. As well as we do get MRF processed cullet in that area. We have had significant quality issues historically. They've been cleaned up as of late. We haven't had too many issues in this particular location, but we have historically have quality issues that can impact our total volume that we can bring in on the MRF processed cullet. In Jacksonville, Florida, we have a brewery return cullet that is very clean. There is a processor that's down in Jacksonville that gets a lot of the brewery return cullet from Anheuser-Busch that's located there. So that comes back very clean, and we have no issues with that quality. We do get MRF processed cullet for this location as well, and historically we run into significant quality problems, and then it goes where we have nothing and we're good, and then we run into significant cullet problems again. So the consistency of that supply has been a continual problem for us, and one of the things that we've done is we actually are bringing that excessive volume of cullet, of amber cullet that's available in that New York area. We actually are railing that all the way down south to Jacksonville to that plant to try to feed in some higher quality cullet to reduce some of our issues that we've had with some of the stuff in the south. In Henrietta, Oklahoma, we get MRF processed cullet, and we have some quality issues with that stuff that is produced locally, that stuff that's produced through the MRFs. Our local cullet producers, we have no quality issues at all. We have great quality that does come from a couple processors that are collecting and sorting by color, so they don't have those contamination risk. We actually bring in cullet all the way from California into our Oklahoma facility because the volume and availability is very limited in that region. We continually are trying to qualify new processors and trying to encourage some market expansions into that area, but we've yet to be completely successful in doing that. We have had some minor improvements with some of the volume improvements with the local cullet producers, but it continues to be a market that struggles significantly with freight. In our Warner Robins, Georgia facility, we get good, clean cullet from the East Coast bottle bill region. This is another location that we send a significant amount of rail down south, and we're able to compete with the market of the MRFs in the southern region. The MRF process cullet down in the south continues to have some quality issues, and the consistency of the supply just continues to be challenged. In Lawrenceburg, Indiana, we produce our own cullet for the most part. We do buy a very small amount of the industry. This is a facility where we produce our liquor bottles, and so we have a lot of job changes. With those job changes comes a lot of glass that gets pushed into being cullet, as we're trying to get on our spec with that. So we actually do produce quite a bit of our own cullet. So with a lot of these variances between the plants, the biggest issues that we're constantly faced with is, how do we get a consistent supply? How do we make sure that the contaminations are non-existent or minimal at best? And how do we make sure that the transportation is going to remain? We also cannot go, we can't take our furnaces from 45% cullet feed to all of a sudden we have a problem, we need to bring it down to 20% cullet feed, and then next week everything's fine and we're back up to 45%. That becomes very challenging operator-wise to move those volumes around that frequently. So we really do try to find a supply that we know is going to have a good quality, be consistent, and something we can basically schedule our plans on. And that's how we're going to train our operators and hope that they can manage to that volume and that percentage of cullet. It makes for it to be far inefficient if we're not managing the percentage on a consistent basis. So some of the benefits of using cullet, cullet requires less energy to melt than raw material. So if we're taking silica, we're taking soda ash, we're taking limestone, we're melting that down to make a glass material, there's a certain required temperature that we have to get to on that glass to get the process, the batch formula that we need coming out of the back end. With cullet, it doesn't take as much heat to actually melt the cullet back into those similar raw materials. So what they say historically is that you can reduce your temperature inside that furnace and still push out good quality glass on the back end. And the biggest, I would say, the biggest issue that we face is that consistent supply. If I knew every day that we were always going to have the same percentage of cullet going into our batch every single day, every hour, we could probably do that, because that is how we would train our operators to run. Now, making your operators go from, they have to be at 2,800 degrees to you can go down to 2,700 degrees and vary according to what that batch is that particular hour. That leaves a lot of room for air and a lot of room for glass issues to come out of the back end. So the biggest thing is making sure that we can get to that consistent source that we know every day we're going to get it. A lot of this material comes truck, some of it comes rail, and so we need to make sure that if we're scheduled for 3 trucks of cullet a day, we get 3 trucks. We try to maintain a certain inventory on hand at each of our facilities in the different various cullet colors, but it doesn't always work out to perfect execution. We have drivers that don't show up. We have drivers, we have 4 loads that come in extra that we didn't order. We have a contamination issue, so a truck needs to be rejected. In addition, we also get some rail cullet, which could add some additional complexity. So we're always trying to keep some extra in the pipeline to try to mask any of those logistic hiccups that could occur. But one of the things, to try to look at is there is a value proposition on what is that energy savings that you can capture. So if you're looking at, $2 per MMBTU, or, I guess we're closer to, $283 today. If you look at that versus looking at an $8 to a $10 per MMBTU, there's a different value proposition for a glass manufacturer. Because basically you're taking that gas, you're converting that into your energy consumption to make that raw material. So there is a different value proposition. The lower the energy cost, my perspective is it does not return as high of a benefit by you pushing the plants to use more cullet. Now there is a break-even point where that does occur, and we try to manage that inside of our budgets and what we plan to do and how we are looking at operating our plants on an annualized basis. Glass is 100% recyclable. you know, it's into perpetuity, can be recycled numerous occasions, and you know, it is something that does help assist in the melting and the forming process. So we have lower furnace emissions and temperatures that occur with higher cullet percentages, and it reduces any of the material going to the landfills. So some of the obstacles that we face is getting the consistent supply and reliability with quality. I've said it 10 times before, and I'll probably say it 100 times more throughout this presentation, because it is simply the most important thing for us. Contamination in the recycled glass, it causes imperfections in our glass containers. There's several things that are occurring. You know, obviously, if you're a consumer and you buy a bottle of beer and you pick it up and it explodes on the base when you go to pull it out of a case because there was a stone on the bottom of that base, that is a problem. So what happens, our largest contamination is a stone, which is typically created from a piece of ceramics. So if that piece of ceramic goes through a pile from the MRF into the truckload, into our pile, into our cullet batch processing, into the furnace, gets pushed along, it melts, just it'll go down a little bit smaller in size as it melts through the process, and then it'll come through the glass and it comes through the shears. Sometimes that stone, the shears will hit the stone and it'll actually create a major issue inside of our operations, because glass will start to basically, you know, pour out of the plant at that point because your shears are no longer cutting your glass gobs to the correct size. So it's an immediate plant that we have to stop with our production at that point to try to fix those shears. If it does make it into the glass, that can become a problem of how do we find it in our equipment. We do a lot of different QC specifications, and we have a lot of optical equipment that is going through our bottles as they move down the line to check for any imperfections. There's a multitude of imperfections that can occur while producing glass, and one of the big things is stones. It's probably our #1 rejection that we get back through. If it is caught, and they're not always caught, we do try to catch as many as we can. There's a certain speed that you have to run the line at to be able to make a certain yield. The slower you run the machine, you're getting a smaller amount of bottles out of the back end, which is going to change your production efficiency. And so we do want to have good asset utilization. That's why we want to try to get the cullet as clean as possible on the front end so we can still have good asset utilization on the back end. So when we look at that, if that stone is caught through our equipment, it'll actually push the bottle through. There'll be a conveyor belt that picks it up on the bottom side of that, and then it runs out back through cullet. So I always try to explain to my MRF suppliers that have stone issues is that you're just making me buy less cullet because I'm creating all my in-house cullet, because every one of those little stones that gets caught gives me a whole bottle to start back on glass again. And so we end up producing our own cullet with some of the imperfections of the glass. So when we look at it, you know, we want to make sure that we don't have bottles exploding. That's not only a consumer issue, that is also an issue that we have for our employees. We want to make sure that what's coming through the line doesn't have those contaminations. Our employees have to go inspect the cullet loads when they come in there. We have had, you know, hypodermic needles inside of the glass. We have plastic, we have paper. Some of these things are fine to a certain amount. You know, we have metals that come through. Those need to be removed as much as possible. The ceramics is our largest issue. But there are a lot of risks that our employees are going through by managing cullet. So we want to try to make sure that it's as clean as possible to reduce any of those exposures to them. So we do our best we take a truckload of cullet that comes in, we take a 5-gallon bucket of that, we sift through that bucket, we look for a certain amount of contaminants in that particular bucket, and then we basically extrapolate that into a larger sample, and then eventually the whole truckload, so 25 tons would get dumped into our pile. We run the risk of contaminating other cullet that's already on the ground if that cullet isn't up to our specifications. You know, the same thing goes with rail. You've got 100 tons in a rail car, so similar issues. If you find that you've got a cullet issue, now you've got 100 tons that are sitting there that you can't use. So there's a significant amount of freight when you look at not having good clean cullet. If I reject that load, then it goes back. If that rail load, and somebody's going to have to pick up that freight for basically shipping it to me, and now I can't take it and they're going to have to return it. So the reprocessing of that cullet is not cheap as well. It's very difficult to prevent 100% of the contamination on cullet, on that side of the end, as well as our end and all the way to the consumer. We just need to try to do our best to manage it as closely as we can with our expectations. So if you look at the picture over there on the top right, you will see that this is kind of a picture of, I would say, a load that we rejected. These are all the parts and pieces that we pulled out of a particular load. You can see there's some connects in there, there's ceramics, there's nails, there are springs from a pen, looks like there's a nut in there, there is some plastic, there's a lot of little things in here, and so it's really important that those things come out. I always joke with my friends, and once I learned of, that ceramics was a contamination to glass, because, I assume everything I put in my recycle bin is recyclable, but it's maybe not. I used to joke with my friends and tell them that if they're throwing out an old coffee cup, if they could just go bury it in their backyard, please, and not throw it in the recycle bin for the sake of glass manufacturers. But we look at, opal borosilicate, so high temp cookware, look at visionware, your glasses. Just because it's glass does not mean it's, a glass that we can take into our process. Non-ferrous metal, so copper, stainless steel, aluminum, bottle crowns, that's a big one, is the caps. Those are not easily picked out from some of the recycles, depending on the equipment and the assets that you have in place. Medical waste, spent needles, and why people throw a needle in their trash can versus, putting it in a disposable, an approved disposable container, I will not understand, but we do have that problem in our Texas facilities. The number one problem that we had is we had to continue to reject loads because we kept getting needles inside of our loads, and that just became a big risk for our employees. So we're working to try to requalify a supplier after almost a year of not taking product from them. One of the other things is, trying to make sure that we pay attention to what's coming through there. Some processors have been known to take ceramics and to grind them up even smaller. So you can't physically see them anymore, but they still create the same issues back into the glass, and they create some dusting issues in the process as well. So we do have some sizing requirements. We want 1 inch in size or slightly larger. We don't want that to be small. We've had it where, like I said, we've had a couple of suppliers historically that would grind it up, so visually it wasn't present. However, it would still come through the furnace and create the same glass defects that we were seeing previously with it as a larger size. So just because you're grinding it and hiding it doesn't mean that it's not going to create an issue on the back end for us as we go through it. So we want it to be properly colored, sorted. I know that's an issue for smaller locations. Is the optical side of, the whole MRF separation is probably the most expensive part of the process. Cullet is not cheap. Well, I realize some people sell to processors by paying them to pick it up. I can assure you that every glass producer out there pays to receive cullet, and it's not cheap on our end. We pay a significant value. When we look at our cost estimates today, we can take soda ash, we can take sand, we can take limestone, we can add all the freight on top of that. And for the most part, we can produce virgin glass cheaper with those raw materials than we can by incorporating cullet. So there are times during down times where we have holidays where we're doing maintenance and we're not pulling glass. We will actually pull cullet to create it and stockpile it, so it gives us some cushion on when issues can present with particular suppliers. We continue to have goals to increase our cullet percentage with several different regions. We've worked with MRFs, we've worked with recyclers. We try to be very, I would say, proactive and try to partner with people on how can we improve this process. We all recognize that there's a lot of room for improvement. I think that there are some myths out there inside of the general population of what recycling really is. I started recycling when my kids told me I was going to kill Mother Earth. And it was, reduce, recycle, reuse. It's the 3 R's, waste management or progressive or Republic or whoever it is goes into the schools. They talk to children at a very young age. They promote the 3 R's. And I'm not sure that that's exactly what we're getting today. And I think we really need to challenge the business concept of what are we looking for? What problem are we trying to solve? What is the value proposition to all? Because nobody's going to do this for free, and I think we all recognize that. We want to be a good steward of our business, and we want to use glass. We would love to be able to improve our glass percentages of cullet use, but it's going to take partnership to be able to do that, and it's going to take some out-of-the-box thinking of how we do things today. For us on our side, and I think probably anybody who sits on the MRF or the recycle side, we sit on 2 ends of a spectrum, and there's a processor in the middle. So the cullet world to us continues to shrink, which has challenges. We have not necessarily seen those benefits to date. I think it depends on how you look at it and how it gets presented to you. But I've been told that the consolidation that's occurring inside the marketplace is good for everybody. I haven't seen it yet. I'm waiting. So we had Strategic Materials. They bought Reflective, and that was December of 2015. That was basically our #1 supplier bought our #2 supplier, which anybody in any business knows that that's typically not good for anybody that sits on that perspective. We continue to work with SMI as a supplier. They are our largest supplier, and that is simply by size, by scope, by location, by every possible way you can look at it. They are the ones that are the largest inside of the industry, so we work with them like any other glass manufacturer is going to. I think MRF sellers struggle with the relationships, and the cost to enter the market are capital intensive upfront. I worked with a handful of MRFs or recyclables are looking at how do I do this? How do I get that processor out of the middle? How do I become a processor? And it's not cheap, right? It's how are you going to sort your inbound material? Are you getting single stream inbound material? Are you getting dual stream inbound material? Do you have the ability of setting up collection locations? Are you a bottle bill state? Are you competing with 20 local people? Are you competing with 4? And I think there are so many variances inside of everybody's marketplace. It's hard to apply a solution for one location across the board to everybody else. I just think we just need to take some serious challenges on what are we doing. I think one of the next issue, we got a notice that Waste Management was removing all glass from the recycle stream in Atlanta. There was no end use claimed. And how many more markets will this continue? I think, if you look through the news for the past, 2 to 5 years, you will see that there's, no market for glass, there's no benefit for glass, and I'll argue that there is an end market for glass. I think there's plenty of processors that can, or manufacturers like Anchor that could increase their cullet usage and their percentage. It's going to be how do we get it there? Freight is a big issue. It's key to expanding it. We can take truck, we can take rail in all of our locations on cullet, but when you start looking at that, you've got to look at all the way from, you picked it up curbside, you brought it to a center, now you're selling it to a processor, now that processor is selling it to a final end use manufacturer. How much freight has been applied to that, and how much has been moved over to the landfill? When that first truck from the MRF goes to a processor, what percentage is recovered? Is it 50% is recovered, so therefore I'm only going to buy it at a discount? Is it 70% is recovered? Is it that it's bottle bill and you're getting 95% recovery? It's going to vary in each market on what that value proposition is. So I think, for us, when we look at the waste management, removing glass from the recycle stream in Atlanta, we have a facility that's an hour outside of Atlanta. We also know there's also another major glass producer that has a facility outside of that region as well. So there's plenty of consumption of good, clean cullet in that marketplace. So the fact that it's being told to the public that there's no end use. And the interesting thing to me is how many people are challenging it. How many people are actually going and saying, well, I don't understand, glass makes sense. Glass used to have really good recovery rates inside of the U.S. What do we do to improve it? Do we segregate it back out of the stream? Do we put in recycle bins, where people have to go self-deposit? What can we do, to make it better and to improve it? I think everybody here at Anchor would love to be part of a solution to figure out what can we do to improve the quality of the cullet, the volume of the cullet, the market region of the cullet. I get calls often from somebody who's got a social conscience and they see glass going to a landfill and they say that can't happen. I'm going to set up a hospitality glass return business. Would you buy the glass? And you start going through it. And we will absolutely help people participate in that type of a practice, but I think once you start getting into it, once you start to realize the transportation side of it, the optical sorting side of it, it's got challenges. It's not a super easy business to get into it. That's why you don't have a lot of competition inside of that space. But there is an opportunity, and I think we continue to work with local MRFs and recyclers on how can we participate in that. How can we give you an end game that helps look at how can you get there? How can you back that into a financial model that makes sense? We have certain municipalities, certain states that have recycling rates. And so we hear of the dynamics of glass cannot be taken out because by volume it's the heaviest. So if you take glass out, then your recycle rates would immediately go down because your volume is going down per ton significantly. And so that, while they don't want glass, they can't physically take it out because then that goes against the state mandate. It may be a tax issue, it may be a bond issue. There could be multiple things that are occurring in different regions on why people will not take glass out. Glass has many uses. We're not the only one, the only end use. There are different things, it's used for reflective bead. It can be used for fiberglass. You have float plants, you have a lot of different usage of the recycled glass that are available, maybe into different, construction type of materials. I know that they use it as kind of a leaching or kind of like a fill for where they're putting in pipes and everything like that. There's many different market uses. I think there will continue to be more market uses coming in front of us as people try to find a solution for how do we recover more glass from those landfills? How do we make sure that we're recycling what truly is recyclable and making sure that we're getting a value for that? We understand that somebody's not going to do it for free. We understand that there's got to be a margin inside of it. We're just asking for some transparency around the process so we can help advance this and move it forward. So one of the interesting things that I've worked with the Container Recycling Institute, and I love this slide. It's glass recycling rates by country, and this was 96, 98 versus 2010. And I think it's amazing when you look at that time frame that the U.S. has not advanced at all in our glass recycling rates. And I would challenge that since 2010, it's probably even gone backwards as we've moved to single stream in so many large areas that we're recovering even less as we move forward. It's more challenging, it's got more contaminants, it does require higher dollar investment to be able to process that or optically sort out those contaminants. So when you look at that, we have glass manufacturers in other countries and they use 80, 90% cullet in their plants for their processing. And that would be great if we could, as an organization, be able to figure out how to get there. But we are far from that because the volume is just not available inside of the U.S. That is considered a good, clean, contaminant-free, I would say, sourced somewhat locally to make sure that the freight doesn't get too far out of hand. But I would challenge people to let them know that I'm getting a rail car from New York all the way to Jacksonville, Florida competitively. So we need to kind of open ourselves on the box a little bit about what is that space, that transportation corridor that historically has been used, and how can we make this a more efficient process for everybody. You know, taking MRF material from one location, shipping it to a processor for a processor to turn around and ship it back. How do we make this more efficient? So those are my thoughts on recycling and where we sit so far as a producer. We're very engaged on trying to figure out how do we make this a more, I would say, transparent process, but also to where we can connect MRFs and recyclers with producers to how do we get a better end game, and how do we make processing better, how do we make collection easier, how do we remove the freight cost of moving what I would say is trash inside of the process, which just increases everybody's fees, and it also reduces the value proposition that you're going to get from a processor. There's got to be a better way to look at this. I think we're going backwards. I've been here for 2 years, and it seems like we're going to where there's much more of a negative connotation on glass recycling inside of the marketplace than there was a few years ago. So I want to open it to everybody at this point. If you have any questions specifically for me, the market, what we do, what some of our plans are, I'll be happy to share.
All right, thank you, Pam. Great presentation. We do have some questions already, but if you do have a question, please use the GoToWebinar dialog box located on your control panel. And so I'll go through these right now, the ones that we do have. There's a few here that have a similar theme, so I think I'm going to combine them. It has to do with the method of collection, curbside versus curbside source separated, and of course through the the MRF type processing, single stream and commingled. Is there a difference or a preference from your end from those types of supplies?
We don't particularly have a preference. What I would say is that the quality typically ends up being where we start to align ourselves. So bottle bill is very good, clean glass. We have very limited issues with our bottle bill glass. So for example, our plants in New York operate at a much higher efficiency because it's 100% bottle bill that's coming into that plant on Cullet. Whereas if we go down south where we're getting all of our glasses from a MRF, we have some issues that occur inside of our operational efficiency. However, I will tell you, I've been to a beautiful processing plant, a MRF, that I've seen the inbound stream that is very interesting and quite mixed, but the outbound glass, you could not tell it wasn't bottle bill. That's how cleaned up it was. It's beautiful glass. So I think there is plenty of opportunity to get to clean, consistent supply from a MRF. We just need to make sure that we have the right partners in place there and that there is the proper investment and that it operates correctly. What we find sometimes with MRFs or with the processors that are taking the MRF glass is that they will increase the volume throughput, which ultimately will decrease the quality. And it takes us, typically a day to 2 days to realize that they're doing this, and then we have to cut them off, and then they have to slow the plant down, and then they have to reprocess the material. If the plant is designed to run 100 tons an hour, you can run 100 tons an hour and you can get to the quality specifications that are required. If you start to run that plant 20% over, you're probably going to run into some problems. And I don't think that is unique to a glass processor. That is unique to anybody. If we were manufacturing our bottles at 120% throughput rate of what we were rated for, we would also have serious quality problems on the outbound. So we're indifferent to where it's coming from. The only thing we focus on is the quality.
Pam, do all your MRF suppliers with curbside or single stream glass have cleanup systems, or don't you know that? Would that solve the problem if they all had that system or systems?
So I want to caution really quick, because I was involved with a meeting a few weeks ago, and there was a MRF that was told that they needed to have a cleanup system. So I want to make sure I give this a little bit of due diligence. That if they invested in this cleanup system, it was going to make the glass on the outbound better, and that it was going to improve their pricing that they would be selling to a processor for. And I will tell you that this particular MRF made that investment and hasn't seen a dime of that return, because that processor is still purchasing it basis the previous quality kind of parameters that were put into place. So I caution you about putting investments in unless you have truly done the due diligence and you've got a processor on the back end who's going to be willing to guarantee you and put something in writing on how that value proposition is going to have a payback for that capital investment. I didn't know about this until a couple weeks ago. I was in a meeting and I heard about it. So I want to preface before anybody goes and spends $500,000 on a cleanup system that they realize they may not receive that value back from that processor. That processor may keep that value to themselves. So what we do is we do have MRFs, or I would say we have more of a collection processors that will go do hospitality type of collection and everything like that. And they do a pretty good job of cleaning it up on the front end. We don't have a problem. Some of that is actually hand sorted on their end, which I know is not physically possible inside of a MRF, but it is if you're looking at a hospitality type of collection.
Pam, is there an interest on the industry side to help MRFs in the Southeast to invest in front-end sorting of glass to get a cleaner stream?
Absolutely. So whether it's, that we look at holistically the industry, or we look at something that's anchor specific, or we look at kind of what is the total value proposition with type of contract takeaways, we would absolutely be interested in trying to find a more reliable, consistent source that would help us permanently increase our percentage of cullet use.
Just a quick clarification on the term. What is hospitality collection?
So that's where they'll go, bars, Disney. Disney has a huge hospitality collection, so they'll go into a commercial type of setting where there's huge glass that gets consumed in a certain location.
Aside from freight, what do you think the other countries in Europe are doing to have such high recovery rates for glass?
I think they have better transparency inside of politics of truly what is going on in their recyclable materials. I think they have land issue. They probably have different tipping fees that occur, which encourage. I think the social responsibility is probably a little bit different inside of some of those European countries from some of the things that I've read. As a child, you are instructed, here's your bag of glass. You walk up to the corner. You learn as a very young age that that's where you go recycle, and it's a social responsibility. And there's a little bit more of a shaming effect on those that don't recycle and don't take that ownership of taking that glass and sorting it out, separately on the front end. But I think there's a lot more transparency on the politics side. One question I ask, and I always find it interesting because I can't find an answer. If I go to my local politician and I ask him, with my 1 ton of recyclable materials that I put in my bin, how much of it actually gets recycled, I think some municipalities and some regions would have a hard time actually capturing that data and getting it to a consumer to understand what's really going on. I think there is a bit of a myth that if you put it in your recycle bin, it will be recycled, provided it meets the requirements and it's not a material, such as a tissue or some non-recyclable material, but somebody said it's a paper product, therefore it's recyclable. We all understand that, but I think trying to get some transparency around that and challenging the taxes that exist today, kind of the structure of it, and really pushing the envelope with what's occurring in your local region or municipality, I think is important. There was a municipality that was looking at, they were making any money on glass. They were looking at doing $1 per household per month increase, so $12 a year to keep glass in the stream, and it was a huge outcry. And I look at that, and I'm capable of paying $12 a year to make sure that my glass that I put in my bin is recyclable. I'm capable of it, but I also have a social conscience to want to do that and to participate in that. It's interesting to me that the uproar that was created out of that $12 a year was pretty intense. And so I think we've got to do a better job of educating people what's really happening, so then they can start to challenge status quo and what's going on. There may need to be, some changes in how the tax structure or how, the recovery rates are, the material rates. I think there's probably some overhaul. I like bottle bill. Bottle bill's great, beautiful, clean glass, but, I think our customers, would fight bottle bill to the nth degree because it's a tax on them as they manufacture or as they push out their products. It's a tax on the front end to them, and then it becomes a recovery issue for them. But it is good, clean glass. It does force a behavior. In the states that you have higher bottle bill rates, you have higher recycling rates in glass.
Okay, here's a follow-up to hopefully this will answer their question. Please ask their question specifically about, do you prefer curb sort to single stream? Whereas the bottle sorted at the curb versus a single stream. What's your preference?
Yeah, I think if you were doing curbside collection, you're going to have a cleaner glass to start with, so your contaminants are going to be less.
Okay. Can you give a quick overview on the West Coast glass recycling? Where are the cullet collectors, preparers, utilizers? With bottle bill states like California, it seems like there would be a lot of glass recovered.
Well, I have very little impact just because we don't participate in that market as a producer. We don't have any. You saw our production locations. Our closest one was in Shakopee, Minnesota, and Henrietta, Oklahoma. However, we do buy glass. That's where we get our cullet from for our Henrietta, Oklahoma facility. I have to get it on rail from California because it's basically there's a void between California and Texas on the cullet and where it's recovered and the processing rate. So we're getting it all the way from California on, and it's not bottle bill that we're getting, it's actually MRF recycled glass. We've had contamination issues with it historically, which when you put it in a rail car and travel that far of a distance across the U.S., it can be very expensive to have to deal with.
This question deals with other types of glass like Pyrex and other forms of non-bottle glass. Do you have any comments on the recyclability of those materials?
I don't have a use for them. I don't know what other end markets do. I don't know if they're ceramic producers or if they can, blend that into. I think they probably just pulverize it into and use it in a potential reflective bead. I don't know if it does become a contamination inside of the fiberglass market, which is probably the next largest market to the glass, the container glass market.
Okay. Does Anchor plan to add technology or improvements to allow for higher percentage material from MRFs? If so, do you think that these improvements could lead to higher percentages of uses of recycled glass and a more reasonable specification?
Well, I think, the way that we look at our business model is, we're trying to put in technology to improve our outbound glass to our customer, right? So we want to make sure that we eliminate any glass defects to our customers. So, the investments that we put into place is looking at having inspection equipment on our glass as it moves through the line. So we really do look at outbound improvements to the glass. We're far more worried about having a consumer glass issue or a customer glass facing issue than we are about the cullet that comes into our facility. The footprint that it would require for us to do any optical sorting at our locations would probably be prohibitive on our front end to turn around and resort. If we buy the cullet at the current market rates, which is not inexpensive, and we turned around and had to do that type of capital investment on our end to resort it again, it would probably be cost prohibitive. If you're talking about that there would be a complete change in the pricing structure as the model exists today, I think that's something to be reviewed, but I would think it would be highly unlikely that we would invest on the inbound side since we're so focused on investing on the outbound side to ensure that there are no glass defects on the outbound.
Do you know of any municipal government program or any collection program out there that is a good model for success as far as the quality of glass?
I'm sorry, Wayne, you cut out there at the end.
Okay, they're looking for maybe an example or a model program out there that provides a good quality glass for your operation.
I mean, there's a facility in New Jersey that is a MRF recycle, and it's probably the nicest, cleanest glass we've ever seen through a MRF. I think New Jersey has its own benefits because the tipping fees are very large. So the more money you have available on, are you going to shove this to a landfill, or can you improve upon the materials that are coming through that and sell them back out to an outbound and end market? I think the dynamics of that work because of the money that's involved. When you get to a state that's got a a $20 tipping fee, I think you lose some of those that value proposition because the investment in the capital that could be required can make it challenging. And I know that's one of the issues certainly with the South is the South does not have very large tipping fees. Actually, I think some of the Midwest states don't either. So as the fee to move it to a landfill versus sorting it, cleaning it up, selling it as an end product, those numbers are always going to dwarf probably anything I can pay on the outbound side, is because I think there's a lot of money that exchanges between what is the tipping fee and what's the processor going to charge me, or frankly, what is the processor going to pay me. If it's a $40 tipping fee and that processor says you're going to pay me $30 to take it because your quality is inferior, or I'm going to pay you $20 to take it because your quality is good, I mean that's $50 I can't get in the middle of. So I think there's a lot of dynamics that happen between the MRF, between the tipping, the fees to tip it, to send it to a landfill, the MRF, and the processor on that front end. And I've seen the charts on some of the spreads for the pricing parameters from those processors, and they can be quite challenging, I believe, for MRFs.
Do you have any numbers on glass recycling rates in the Asia market?
I do not. I can go on. I can look on the Container. I'm not sure if anybody's looked at the Container Recycling Institute. It's a great website. They have some statistics that you can download free on the website. I'm not sure if Asia is part of that or not. I don't think Asia is probably the best recyclable country out there, so I think they're a hard one to compare against. I mean, Europe obviously has some great recycling rates, and I think certainly on our side, that's what, it'd be great if we could aspire to be something better than we are today, and look towards those models, because they're already successfully doing it.
Okay, here's a person from South Carolina Department of Commerce who's interested in recycling investment, so I will forward that information on to you, Pam.
Okay.
That's good news. Do you think we've seen the bottom of the market shift from glass to plastic? I.e., what is the long-term prospect for glass recycling back into glass containers?
Well, I have to take a biased approach because I'm in the glass market. But I mean, I've only been here for 2 years, so I'm also still a realist. I look at it as a consumer. When you look at what can possibly move to plastic, what can possibly move to aluminum, there are different cost propositions and there are manufacturing issues that can exist with all three of those as containers. We've continued to see some glass bottles move to, we call it the tall aluminum cans, such as an Anheuser-Busch bottle, and that's at a football game, right? They're not going to allow glass at a football game anymore, so there's some practical uses of why glass has been converted off. The market has consolidated pretty significantly inside of the U.S. market. We basically are running our plants at capacity. We have a full book of volume on our side, we don't have any available capacity. When I first got to this organization 2 years ago, there was some available capacities in a couple of their plants, and that no longer exists. We are running full out. So I would say that I don't think that there's going to be further consolidation. I think you also have some of the kickbacks and some of the pushbacks on, you know, when you have different products that have moved into other packaging, which has created some problems now, such as foil packaging for drinks or baby food products, you know, some of the issues that you see as a consumer that exist with that. You have some of the issues with consumer issues with the BPAs in plastic and what's the long-term health impacts of that. You know, are people properly storing that plastic bottle? Are they keeping it out in the heat where that there's a reaction that can occur? I think there's a bit of a public backlash that still has an opportunity to push back on further changes into plastic. But I think you also got to remember that the market has entered, and I don't know if it's millennials or the generation after that, or if any Generation X was to blame, but we've moved to a more boutique kind of sales plan, right? Craft beer is huge. It's not the mass beer that's making the market changes anymore. It's craft beer that makes the market changes. Go to a liquor store. When you used to go to a liquor store 5 years ago, there was 5 types of vodka. Go to a liquor store today, there's 200 types of vodka. So I think you've gone from a mass beer to a craft beer, from a mass liquor to a craft liquor market. I think you look at food, right? People want to buy local. So you've got all these little local food markets that pop up, and most of that is going to be put into glass because it's an easier product for them to get and also to package. It's a lot easier to package a glass bottle without equipment and machinery than it is going to be, you know, say a jelly or something like that into a different type of, you know, container. Sauces and salsas and jellies, those are probably always going to remain predominantly in glass just because the functionality of it. So I think, you know, do we see that that's going to continue to shift away from glass? I don't think so. I think there could be actually some upside of having market improvements inside of glass. So, you know, one of the numbers to look at that's interesting is if you look at glass containers that are shipped into the U.S. market, there's about 33 million gross of glass containers that are shipped into the U.S. from predominantly China, Mexico, Eastern Europe, some different countries there. That's about the size of our entire portfolio that's being imported into this country today. So do I see that, you know, glass is going to change inside of the U.S. market? I think it's unlikely. I think it's probably at a pretty healthy position where we're at today, and if anything, it could potentially grow.
Okay, another technology question. Do you feel that an optical quality control sort at the front side of your plant might be a good way to lower back-end defects?
Well, I think that was kind of, you know, I was kind of answering that a little bit on one of the previous questions, is that, you know, having optical sorting is a pretty sizable footprint, which we don't necessarily have the space for today. So if I'm going to buy MRF material through a processor and then turn around and optically sort it again, you know, that's going to create it's going to create a pretty sizable expense on our end, where it's just much easier for somebody who has that optical equipment to do it on their end already. So, you know, are we looking at setting up and becoming a processor on our plant locations? And I would say strategically at this time, no.
Okay.
Partnering with people, yes, but not doing it ourselves independently.
Right. Okay, there's some people here looking, wonder if they could have your email address if they want to contact you.
Sure.
Can you give that out?
Sure, it's pam.baylor, B-A-Y-L-O-R, @anchorglass.com.
Okay, good. All right, I think we're going to wrap it up at this point. Great questions from everybody, and thank you, Pam, for providing the feedback on the questions. So we're going to wrap it up now, and again, this webinar, like all the webinars in this series, has been recorded and will be made available via YouTube links on both the National Recycling Coalition and Recycling Market Center websites. Thanks again for joining us, and thanks again, Pam, for taking time out to make this presentation. We'll hope you'll join us for next month's webinar. Please visit the NRC and RMC websites for schedule updates. And have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.